The last free voice. Preface. The Last Free Voice is a tale woven with the threads of fantasy, but its heart beats with a fierce relevance to the political realities of our own world. Beneath the shimmering veil of swords, spires and distant realms, this story is an allegory, a cutting rebuke to the political systems that too often prioritize power over the will of the people. Through the struggles of Halvard, a humble farmer thrust into the machinations of a distant city's assembly, the reader is drawn into a world where the shadow of political parties looms large, suffocating the very ideals of democracy and the voices of the constituents they purport to represent. At its core, the story serves as a scathing critique of the party machine, a nameless, faceless force that governs not through reason or justice, but through the quiet dominion of power, greed, and coercion. Like the parties that dominate modern political landscapes, this machine manipulates loyalty, punishes dissent and rewards those who bend to its will, regardless of the consequences for the people it claims to serve. Halvard's journey, though one of personal resolve and defiance, ultimately reflects the universal struggle faced by citizens caught under the sway of systems that seem too vast, too entrenched to resist. The allegory is sharp. We see in the whips, those dark figures that wield fear and silence opposition, the very mechanisms that ensure conformity within political parties, an enforced obedience that leaves scarce room for genuine debate or the authentic representation of the people. The shadows cast by the party's machinery leave those who dare to stand against it isolated and diminished, their voices drowned by the overwhelming noise of political allegiances and factionalism. Halvard's fight is not just against the physical boundaries of the towered city but against the quiet tyranny that has corrupted the realm's true purpose. The story is not merely a fantasy adventure, it is a rallying cry for a democracy that places the people, not the party, at its center. It challenges the dangerous illusion that unity must be sacrificed at the altar of truth, urging us to confront the reality that when the voices of the people are silenced and molded by power, the very essence of democracy begins to crumble. Amid the struggles of the last free voice, Halvard's refusal to bow to the machine is a reminder that the true power of governance lies not in the hands of those who control the levers of political parties, but in the hands of the people. As the story unfolds, it forces us to reflect on our own systems, to question whether we too are under the shadow of a machine, one that distances us from the ideals of democracy and the genuine concerns of the very people it is meant to serve. Halvard's journey is not just one of political resistance but of hope, the hope that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the voices of the people can still rise above the din of politics, unbroken and unbowed. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Party. In the quiet lands of the Shireward, nestled far from the thrum and clamor of the great cities, life had once moved in a rhythm both steady and sure. The people of these green hills and fertile valleys were industrious but content, tending to their fields and trades with little concern for the distant halls of power. They had, in days long past, sent forth their chosen to the grand assembly in the towered city of Eldenmere, believing it to be a place where the voices of all lands might be heard, where wisdom and goodwill would guide the fate of the realm. Yet, in these latter days, a shadow had grown over the towered city and its reach had crept far beyond its high gates. The shadow was not one of cloud or storm, but of quiet dominion. Its tendrils wove through the assembly, coiling around those who had gone there to speak for their people. It whispered of unity and order, of strength that could only come through allegiance to its will. Those who resisted found themselves isolated, their words drowned in the tumult of the machine. The party machine, they called it, though its true name was seldom spoken. It was no simple thing of cogs and wheels, but a vast and faceless power, born of ambition and greed. It demanded loyalty above all else and rewarded its servants with riches and rank, though at a cost few could bear to reckon. The towered city of Eldenmere, once a place of debate and deliberation, had become a battlefield of factions, where decisions were made not in the light of open council, but in the shadowed corners of secret halls. In the Shireward, the people had grown restless. They saw their lands neglected, their voices silenced and their chosen representative, whom they had once called the Voice, reduced to little more than a mouthpiece for the machine. The Voice had been a person of great promise, a figure of humble beginnings who had risen with the trust and faith of their neighbors, but the towered city had claimed them, as it had claimed so many before. "They no longer speak for us," said one elder of the village, as the people gathered in the shaded square beneath the ancient oak. "They speak for the machine and the machine does not know us. It does not know our land, our labor, or our hopes." The murmurs of agreement grew into a low rumble, and soon all eyes turned to a figure who stood apart from the gathering, leaning against the old stone well. This was Halvard, a farmer by trade, accustomed to measured work and careful toil. He was known for his sharp mind and steady hand, often observing the fiery debates that consumed the village square but speaking only when he had something of true substance to add. "Speak, Halvard," called another voice, a woman who stood with arms crossed and a brow furrowed. "Do you not see the need for change?" Halvard sighed and stepped forward, his boots stirring the dust of the square. "I see it," he said, his voice low but clear. "I see the shadow that stretches from the towered city to our fields, and I feel its weight. But what would you have me do? Stand against it? The machine is vast, and we are few. It is built on power and fear, and those who serve it will not loosen their grip easily." "Then who will stand, if not us?" the woman replied, her voice rising. "Shall we wait for the machine to tighten its hold until we can no longer speak at all? If the voice we sent will not break free of its chains, then we must find another way. We must send a new voice, one unbound by the machine." There was a silence then, heavy with the weight of her words. Halvard looked at the faces of his neighbors, worn but resolute. He thought of the towered city of Eldenmere, of its gleaming spires and shadowed halls, and of the machine that ruled them. The task seemed impossible, like standing against the tide with nothing but a frail shield. Yet, in the quiet of his heart, he knew the truth of it: the shadow could not endure forever. "The voice of the people is not a prize to be claimed," Halvard said at last. "It is a duty, one that demands resolve, not privilege. If I must bear it, then I will do so without faltering. But I will not bow to the machine. I will speak for this land and for all who have been silenced." A buzz swept through the gathering, rising into a cheer. The people of the Shireward had found their champion, not a warrior or a lord, but a farmer with a steady hand and an unyielding will. And so began Halvard's journey, not to conquer the machine, but to challenge its dominion and to bring the voice of the people back to the halls of the towered city. Little did he know how far the shadow reached, or how great the trials he would face. Chapter 2: The Struggle for the Seat. The Shireward had never been a battleground, but as the day of the election drew near, it became one. Not a field of clashing swords, but of whispered slander, shadowed threats, and the relentless march of the machine. For generations, the great parties, the Red Stag, the Blue Falcon, the Green Oak and the Yellow Sun, had ruled unchallenged, power passing between them in an unbroken cycle. Their candidates did not campaign to earn their seats, they merely awaited their anointment by a system that had long since turned democracy into a ritual rather than a contest. But Halvard's entry into the fray was an insult they would not tolerate. The party machine had sent its emissaries before the ink on his nomination was dry. They came dressed in fine robes, draped in the colors of their allegiance, speaking in voices honed for persuasion. "You cannot win," uttered the man bearing the sigil of the Blue Falcon. "You divide the vote, but you do not threaten us. Step aside and perhaps we'll find a place for you among us." "The people of Shireward know where their loyalties lie," sneered the woman of the Yellow Sun. "You seek to pull them from safety into the wilderness. Do you truly believe they will follow?" The worst of them was the whisperer from the Red Stag, who did not make threats nor empty promises but merely sat across from Halvard in the village inn, sipping his ale, and said, "We will bury you in paper and ink before the first vote is cast." And so they did. The villages and townships of the Shireward were soon flooded with leaflets proclaiming Halvard a radical, a fool, a liar. Pamphlets spread dark rumors: he was in the pocket of foreign lords, a secret ally of bandits, or worse, an agent of chaos who would see their land stripped of its rights. No doorstep was left unvisited by the foot soldiers of the machine. At first, they came with kindly words, reminding the folk of Shireward of the prosperity the great parties had promised them. But when kindness did not suffice, the weight of power pressed harder. Merchants who openly supported Halvard found their licenses questioned, their shipments delayed. Farmers who spoke his name in the markets discovered sudden inspections, new taxes, subtle but undeniable punishments for their defiance. Even the town's elder, a man of 70 years who had seen many seasons pass, found his stipend from the assembly reassessed and halved overnight. Halvard did not possess the wealth of the great parties, nor their armies of agents, but he had something they did not: the truth. And so he walked the fields, stood in the town squares, and spoke in plain words. "I am not a lord. I am not a wealthy man. I have no banners, nor promises of coin," he told them. "But I know this land, as you do. I know the toil of the plow, the ache of a long day's labor, and I know that for too long, we have sent our voices to the towered city, only to have them caged. If you send me, I will not be caged." It was not speeches alone that won hearts, but deeds. When the tax collectors came down on the miller, declaring that his books were in arrears by a debt he did not owe, it was Halvard who stood beside him and forced the officers to show their writs. When the machine sent men to oversee the fishing boats at the southern lake, taking fair shares of the haul, it was Halvard who led the resistance, standing shoulder to shoulder with the fishermen until the inspectors left empty-handed. The night before the vote, the final blow came. Halvard's name vanished from the official registry in the town's book of candidates. Word spread swiftly. His candidacy was disqualified. The machine had made its move. Yet when the people gathered in the village square, their voices did not waver. An elder strode forward, a former steward of the town who knew the rules of governance better than those who sought to twist them. "The writ may say his name is struck," he declared, holding aloft the thick, leather-bound book that had recorded every election of the shire ward for hundreds of years, "but our voices are not bound by ink." And so, when the votes were cast, they did not look to the parchment set before them. They took quill to blank paper, wrote Halvard of Shireward by hand and placed their ballots in the box. The tallymen, servants of the machine, tried to argue. The assembly's rules were thick as an ancient oak's trunk, and within them, surely, some clause could be found to render the people's will invalid, but the numbers could not be ignored. By dawn, the truth was clear. Against all odds, in a system built to keep men like him from winning, Halvard had triumphed. The day he left for the towered city of Eldenmere, the people of Shireward gathered to see him off. Some cheered, others wept, for they knew what he now faced. As he mounted his horse, one of the old millers took his hand, his grip firm despite his years. "Do not let them break you, lad," he said. "We sent you to speak, not to kneel." Halvard bowed his head. "Then I shall stand," he swore, "until my voice is heard." And with that, he rode toward the towered city, where the machine waited and where the battle for the realm's soul would unfold. Chapter 3: The Whipslash. The towered city of Eldenmere rose before Halvard, its spires cutting the sky like jagged shards of glass. From a distance, it seemed a place of grandeur, its walls gleaming white in the sunlight. Yet as he drew nearer, the illusion fell away. The streets were choked with grime, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Voices called out from the alleys, not in greeting, but in barter, each word carrying the weight of desperation. "This is where the realm is ruled," Halvard muttered, his voice low, "and yet it feels more like a battlefield." By the time he reached the gates, Halvard's boots were caked in the muck of the lower burrows. The grand arches, flanked by statues of long-dead stewards, stood as silent sentinels. Their faces, worn smooth by the passage of time, betrayed none of the hope they once inspired. He passed beneath their shadows and entered the heart of the city. Here, the streets were wider, lined with towering edifices of marble and gold. Yet even these bore the marks of neglect. Ivy strangled the lower walls and fissures ran deep where the stones had begun to crumble. Merchants hawked their wares with forced gaiety, their eyes darting nervously toward the distant towers where the machine's power loomed. Halvard's destination was one such tower, the Hall of the Assembly, where the realm's affairs were debated, decided and too often dismissed. Its spire rose high above the city, a needle piercing the heavens, but to Halvard, it seemed more like a prison, its iron gates an unspoken warning. Enter and be bound. Inside the hall, the air was thick with tension. Two long opposing rows of benches faced each other across a narrow aisle, their rigid alignment mirroring the adversarial nature of debate within. At the far end, raised upon a grand dais, stood the speaker's chair, imposing as a throne. The walls were draped in banners bearing the insignia of the great parties, the red stag, the blue falcon, the green oak and the yellow sun. Each symbol proclaimed loyalty not to the realm, but to the factions that claimed dominion over it. Halvard's footsteps echoed as he ascended to his appointed seat, his presence drawing curious glances from the other members of the assembly. Some whispered behind their hands, others openly sneered. He was an outsider, a newcomer who dared to defy the established order. It was not long before he saw them. The whips. They moved through the chamber like shadows, their dark robes blending into the dim light. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but their voices carried an unnatural weight. Each whip approached members in turn, speaking in low tones. Some nodded quickly, eager to appease. Others hesitated, their faces pale as if caught in a snare. Halvard watched as one of the whips, a tall figure with a voice like grinding stone, approached a frail-looking woman seated near the edge of the chamber. The long years of frustration under the machine had taken their toll and her defiance now teetered on the brink. Halvard's eyes flicked to the frail figure. He recognized her, Elendra of the Western Vale, known for her fiery speeches and honest principles. The whip leaned close, his words too quiet to hear, but Halvard could see the fear in Alendra's eyes. She shook her head, her hands trembling. Moments later, the whip turned away and Alendra sank into her seat, her shoulders slumped. A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. Halvard caught snippets of conversation. "She's finished. Defied them one too many times. Foolish to think she could resist." Halvard's jaw tightened. He had heard tales of the whips, their methods, their cruelty, but seeing it unfold before him was another matter. These were not stewards of the realm's will. They were enforcers of the machine, ensuring that no voice rose above the din of obedience. Before the session began, Halvard was summoned. A junior clerk, pale and trembling, delivered the message in hurried tones. "The chief whip requests your presence, immediately." Halvard followed the clerk through winding corridors until they reached a small, dimly lit chamber. Inside, a figure waited. The chief whip was a gaunt man with piercing eyes that seemed to see into the very marrow of one's soul. His voice was soft, almost pleasant, but it carried the weight of command. "Halvard of Shireward," the chief whip began, gesturing for him to sit. "I trust you understand the importance of unity in these uncertain times." Halvard remained standing. Unity should not come at the cost of truth. The chief whip's thin lips curled into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Truth, dear Halvard, is a malleable thing. It bends to the will of those who wield it. The machine exists to ensure stability. Surely you see the wisdom in that." "I see only chains," Halvard replied. "Chains that bind not only the members of this assembly but the people we are meant to serve." The chief whip's smile vanished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You are new here, so I will grant you this courtesy. Defiance is not tolerated. Those who resist find themselves diminished. Do not make an enemy of the machine, Halvard. It is a battle you cannot win." Halvard met the whip's gaze, his own steady. "Then it is a battle worth fighting." As he left the chamber, Halvard felt the weight of the machine pressing down upon him. Doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. He had seen the cost of resistance in Alendra's broken form, felt the cold menace of the whip's words, yet in his heart, a flame still burned. The machine thrived on fear, on submission. But Halvard would not bow. He would speak, even if his voice was drowned in the cacophony of the assembly. For in the shadows of the towered city, he had glimpsed the truth. The machine was powerful, but it was not invincible. And so long as even one voice remained unbroken, there was hope for the realm. Halvard tightened his cloak and stepped into the marble hall, his footsteps echoing like a herald's call. The battle had begun. Chapter 4. The Chains of Order. Halvard moved through the dim corridors of the assembly, his mind still weighted by the whip's words. The meeting had ended, but its echoes clung to him like mist in the lowlands. He had defied the machine and now the consequences would unfold. He had seen what happened to those who stood firm. The assembly had its ways of breaking even the strongest. His colleagues avoided his gaze as he passed. Where once there had been murmured greetings, now there was silence. It had begun. By the time he reached his chambers, a letter had already been delivered, sealed with the insignia of the assembly but bearing no name. He broke it open with careful fingers. "We had hoped you would be wise. There is still time to reconsider. The storm need not break upon you. Speak with us again and you will find the path smoother." No signature, no direct threat. But he understood well enough. If he bent, all would be forgiven. If not, the storm would come. The first test had been his ability to withstand the whip's words. Now came the second: endurance. The days that followed saw him increasingly isolated. Invitations vanished. His name was quietly struck from discussions. When he spoke in the assembly, his words were met with studied disinterest. Resolutions he proposed were dismissed without debate. The machine was turning its gears against him, showing him that without its favor, he would be a voice in the wilderness. But it was not enough to make him yield. And so, the game escalated. The whispers began in the halls, suggestions that he had ulterior motives, that he sought only to disrupt for the sake of ambition. An old friend, reluctant but compelled, warned him that rumors were being placed into the ears of those who mattered. The machine did not need to destroy him outright, it only needed to make him appear dangerous, self-serving, reckless. One evening, as he left the assembly, two figures flanked him in the shadowed corridors, enforcers of the machine's ever-watchful eye, reminders that he was always within reach. He met their eyes, betraying no fear. They did not speak, they only ensured he knew he was watched. Then came the final warning. A second letter, placed upon his desk in the dead of night. This time, the message was starker. "You believe yourself unbreakable. That is arrogance. There are many ways to silence a voice, some quieter than others. Halvard read the words in the flickering candlelight, his pulse steady. They wanted him to bow. They wanted him to retreat into silence, to become just another name swallowed by the machine. He would not. Lifting his quill, he penned 4 words beneath their threat, unsigned but unmistakable. Then let it come. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. The halls of the assembly grew colder in the days that followed. It was not the chill of winter's breath, nor the draft of stone corridors, but something deeper, an absence of warmth, an emptiness where once there had been voices. Halvard felt it in every chamber and corridor, in the wary glances of those who still spoke to him and in the studied indifference of those who did not. The machine had turned against him in full. Isolation was only the beginning. Now came the whispers, the deceitful, disparaging campaign against him, suggesting that he was reckless and dangerous, a man who sought only to unravel the order upon which the realm depended. Those who might have once stood beside him now hesitated, fearful of sharing his fate. While walking the dim-lit corridors toward his chambers, he found himself flanked again by the 2 shadowy figures he had noticed stalking him previously. They skulked with an air of watchfulness, a reminder that his every word and footfall was being watched and measured. Halvard of Shireward, one of them addressed in a hushed tone, bowing slightly. A word, if you will. Halvard did not break his stride. Say what you must. The man fell into step beside him, lowering his voice. There are ways to ease your burden. The path you walk is difficult, but there are hands willing to guide you, to lift the weight from your shoulders. You need only listen. Halvard stopped, turning to face them fully. And what is it that these generous hands require in return? The second man, older and sharper-eyed, smiled thinly. His voice, dry as old parchment, carried a measured weight, pragmatism, a willingness to work with those who keep the realm standing. The machine is vast, Halvard. It rewards those who serve it well. Halvard studied them in the flickering torchlight. Here it was, at last, the baited hook, the promise of safety, of position, of favor, if only he would bend. He shook his head. I have seen what the machine rewards. I have seen its price. The first man sighed, as one who had hoped for a more convenient answer. You are making an enemy of powerful friends. I would rather stand alone than kneel among the corrupt. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the older one gave a slight nod. So be it. They turned and melted into the darkness, leaving Halvard alone. Each passing day brought greater trials. He was made to feel like a ghost, present but unheard, a voice calling into an empty hall. But beyond the walls of the assembly, beyond the clutches of the machine, a different sound was stirring. Word had reached the villages and towns, of a man who would not yield, who did not bow to the faceless powers that ruled the realm. From the markets of the lowlands to the high halls of the guilders, voices began to whisper his name, not in scorn, but in hope. For there were many who had long felt abandoned by the assembly, many who had come to see it as a place of distant lords and hidden bargains, where the will of the people was but a whisper beneath the clash of ambition. A letter arrived at Halvard's chamber, this time not from the whips or their agents, but from the people. A woman of the northern fiefs had written it, her script unpolished but her meaning clear. They do not listen to us, they do not see us, but we have heard you and we are watching. Halvard traced the ink with his fingers, feeling the weight of it. The machine had sought to isolate him, to silence him, to make him believe he was alone. But he was not. And so, the storm gathered. Chapter 6. The Fractured Hall. Dark murmurs filled the assembly chambers. The machine, vast and unyielding, had begun to turn its eye upon itself. The rival factions within it, once bound by necessity, now gnawed at each other like starving wolves. The great lords of policy and decree, the masters of the hidden ledgers, whispered behind closed doors, each seeking to secure their own dominion. Yet even in their strife, they remained united in one belief, that Halvard must not be allowed to succeed. Halvard sat alone at his desk, the parchment before him marked with the ink of his latest proposal, a simple decree that would grant the villages direct voice in the assembly. A modest change, yet one that, if passed, would pierce a hole in the fortress walls of the machine. He had no illusions. The whips would not allow such a breach to stand. As if summoned by his thoughts, the chamber doors creaked open. A shadow moved across the threshold, a figure clad not in the robes of the machine but in the drab, travel-worn garb of the outer provinces. You risk much coming here, Halvard said, though he did not rise. The figure stepped forward, lowering the hood to reveal a ravaged woman with dark, steady eyes. And you risk more with each defiant action you take among the assembly, she replied, her tone unwavering. Elendra. The name stirred memories Halvard had tried to bury, memories he had pushed down, lest he too may eventually suffer a similar fate. Halvard had thought her spirit completely crushed, that all fight had been extinguished, but what he didn't yet understand was that her reputation had been so thoroughly traduced by the malevolence of the machine that Elendra calculated she had little left to lose in returning to the fray. Once, Elendra had been a voice in the assembly, a firebrand who spoke for those long ignored, but she had been thwarted, frustrated, and ultimately ground down into submission. The whips had even threatened to air defamatory false allegations against her, resorting to costly blackmail, before driving her out, casting her into exile when her defiance grew too great. To see her now was to see a ghost returned. "They watch you closely," she said, glancing toward the high alcoves where the unseen eyes of the machine lurked. "They fear what you might become." Halvard let out a weary breath. "And yet they do not strike. Why?" "Because they are divided." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The machine is cracking. Its lords fight among themselves and the people stir beyond these walls. You have set something in motion, whether you meant to or not." "I meant to," Halvard admitted. He met her gaze, "and I mean to see it through." She studied him for a long moment, then placed a sealed parchment upon his desk. "Then you must know what comes next." He broke the seal and scanned the contents. It was a petition, signed by hundreds, merchants, farmers, scholars, soldiers, all calling for an end to the assembly's stranglehold. It was a cry for reform, for representation, for a breaking of chains long thought unbreakable. "The people are watching," Elendra said. "They wait for a sign." Halvard clenched his fist around the parchment. The machine had worked to box him in, to wear him down, to make him doubt his own strength. But the ground was shifting, and soon, nothing would hold. He rose from his chair. "Then let us give them one." Chapter 7. The Weight of the Parchment. A hush had fallen upon the assembly. Not the silence of order, but the silence of a tremor before the mountain cracks. Halvard stood in the center of the chamber. The parchment in his grip carried the weight of steel, a burden not of metal, but of the world it might remake. Before him, the lords of the machine sat in their high-backed chairs, their faces masks of studied indifference, but their fingers twitched upon the gilded arms of their thrones. "The people have spoken," Halvard's voice rang out, filling the vast hall. "They demand an assembly that serves them, not the whims of those who cling to power." The chief whip, ever draped in his faceless authority, leaned forward. "And are we to be blown by every fickle wind? Shall we bow to the mob?" Halvard met his gaze unflinching. "It is no mob that calls for change, but the very foundation of this realm. A foundation you have long ignored." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Even among the ranks of the machine, there were those who had begun to waver, those who saw the walls closing in. The factions within the machine had grown restless, their infighting more desperate, their control slipping like sand through aged fingers. Then came the voice of Lord Malkoran, one of the elder architects of the machine. "You are young, Halvard. You believe in storms and in fire, but you do not understand what it is to govern." His voice was weary, yet lined with iron. "The people do not know what they want. They cry for freedom, but they shun responsibility. They seek heroes, but they will turn upon them in time." Halvard took a step forward. "Then let them turn upon me if they must. I do not fear the judgment of those I serve." A ripple of approval rose from the gallery, where those not bound by party chains had gathered. The independent voices, few but growing, watched with quiet resolve. He was not alone. Not anymore. The chief whip's knuckles whitened. "You would tear down the pillars of order for the sake of an ideal." Halvard shook his head. "I would see the pillars raised anew, that they may stand for all, not merely the few." He lifted the parchment high. "And I bring proof that the realm stands with me." A low rumble echoed through the chamber. Outside, the city was stirring. The people, long ignored, had found their voices. From the alleyways and markets, from the fields and forges, they gathered. The assembly walls could not keep them out forever. The machine had ruled for centuries, unchallenged in its power, but now, its gears ground against themselves, its levers rusted with disuse. And in that moment, as Halvard stood before its masters, he saw what they feared most. Change had come. And it would not be turned away. Chapter 8. Whispers in the Dark. The towered city of Eldenmere lay beneath a sky bruised with the colors of dusk, the last vestiges of daylight swallowed by the creeping shadow of night. Yet in the dim-lit streets and crowded halls, a different kind of darkness festered. Word of Halvard's defiance had spread beyond the assembly's marble walls, whispered from merchant to beggar, from scholar to smith. Some called him a fool, others a hero, but none could deny that he had struck a chord in the heart of the realm. Within the stone-wrought depths of the machine's council chambers, the Lords of Order convened. The chief whip sat at the head of the table, his fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm against the polished oak. Around him, cloaked figures muttered in low tones, their voices thick with unease. "He stirs the rabble," one hissed. "They gather in the squares, calling for reform. This cannot stand." "The people are fickle," another scoffed. "They will forget in time, as they always do." The chief whip raised a hand, silencing the debate. "No," he said, his voice cool and measured. "This one is different. He does not merely oppose us, he exposes us. He must be dealt with." Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of a candlelit chamber, Halvard sat across from an unexpected but welcome visitor, one he had not anticipated seeing return so soon. Elendra, once a fierce voice in the assembly, now carried the weight of disillusionment in her tired eyes. The fire that had once made her a thorn in the machine's side still burned, but it flickered beneath the strain of all she had seen. Before her frail figure, parchment lay strewn with inked words, proof of what she had long suspected but never dared to acknowledge. "The machine does not govern, Halvard," she murmured. "It devours. It takes from the people and feeds only itself." Halvard studied the documents, reading of secret pacts, of wealth siphoned into unseen hands, of decrees crafted not in the name of justice but in the pursuit of dominion. The depth of the betrayal was staggering, but he felt no surprise, only a grim certainty that the course he had chosen was the only one left. "There is more," Elendra continued. "Two factions within the machine war against one another. They care not for the people, nor for the realm's future. Their struggle is for dominion alone." Halvard's jaw tightened. The assembly was not merely broken, it was rotting from within. And while the lords of the machine bickered over their spoils, the realm suffered. A knock at the door shattered the hush of the chamber. A messenger, breathless and wide-eyed, stepped forward. "The people, they march, my lord, to the assembly. They demand to be heard." Halvard rose, his heart hammering. The storm was gathering. The battle was no longer confined to the great halls of power, it had spilled into the streets, into the hearts of the people. And if the machine would not yield to reason, then perhaps it would be forced to yield to something far greater. Hope. Halvard took up his cloak and fastened its clasp. "Then let us answer them," he said, "for the realm shall not be ruled by shadows any longer." Chapter 9, The Gates of Power. The streets of Eldenmere trembled beneath the weight of voices, a tide of discontent rolling through the city as the people took to the squares and avenues. Torches flickered in the deepening twilight, their glow illuminating faces lined with anger, with hope, with the weariness of long-suffered injustice. From every quarter, they came, artisans and merchants, scholars and laborers, their grievances as varied as their trades, yet bound together by a singular cry: "No more chains, no more masters." Halvard stood upon the steps of the assembly hall, the great domed fortress of the machine looming behind him, its towering columns like the ribs of some vast and slumbering beast. Beside him, Elendra watched the crowd. Glimmers of hope danced in her gaze. "They come with hope," Halvard observed, his gaze sweeping over the throng. "But hope alone is not enough. We must give them reason to believe." Even as he spoke, a ripple passed through the mass of people and the chant that had begun in scattered pockets grew to a deafening roar. "Let them answer us. Let them face us." The great doors of the assembly remained shut, bolted from within. The lords of the machine would not meet them in the open. The chief whip and his faction, no doubt, sat ensconced in their chambers, calculating their next move. Elendra inhaled sharply. "They will not let this pass unanswered, Halvard. They will not grant you a victory so easily." "I do not expect them to," Halvard replied. "But the longer they hide, the more the people will see them for what they are: cowards, unfit to govern." Yet even as he spoke, the crowd's fervor threatened to spill over. The voices of reason among them were few and the anger of the dispossessed many. Without leadership, without direction, their uprising could turn to chaos. Halvard clenched his fists. If the machine wished to paint them as an unruly mob, he would not hand them the brush. He stepped forward, raising his hands. "People of Eldenmere and beyond." His voice rang out, carried over the din. The crowd quieted, thousands of eyes turning toward him. "We stand upon the threshold of change. But change is not won through fury alone. It is won through resolve, through unity, through the unyielding strength of a people who will not be silenced. The machine would divide us, set us against one another so that we may never rise. But we are not divided. We are one." A hum ran through the crowd. Nods exchanged, hands clasped. The tide of their anger had not ebbed, but he had given it purpose. And then, from the shadows of the assembly's high balconies, a voice rang out, sharp as a dagger. "You speak of unity, Halvard, but you bring only discord." The crowd turned, and there, standing at the edge of the high balcony, bathed in the flickering light of distant braziers, was Lord Dane of the Machine, one of the assembly's most seasoned members, his silvered hair gleaming in the firelight. His expression was one of carefully measured disappointment. "We hear your grievances," Dane continued, projecting his voice with the practiced ease of a statesman. "But you come to our doors with shouts and demands, not with reason, not with respect for the laws that govern us all." He turned his gaze upon Halvard. "You claim to seek justice, yet you wield the will of the mob as a weapon. Tell me, is this the future you offer? Rule not by wisdom, but by those who shout the loudest?" A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Halvard exhaled slowly. Dane was no fool. He knew well how to twist the blade of doubt. "You speak of law, my lord," Halvard called back. "Yet what is law, if it serves only the few? What is order if it binds the people in chains? The assembly was meant to serve the realm, yet it has become a hollow thing, ruled by factions who bicker over power while the land crumbles beneath their feet." A cheer rose from the crowd at his words, but Dane merely smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You are young, Halvard, and idealistic." He gestured toward the closed doors of the assembly. "But change does not come through defiance alone. It comes through patience, through compromise." Halvard stepped forward, his eyes locked on the elder statesman. "You speak of compromise, yet the machine allows none. It demands only obedience." Dane's smile did not waver. "Then come inside. Speak with us. Debate, if you will." He spread his arms. "Or is it easier to stand upon the steps and rouse the people to anger?" The challenge was clear, and the trap no less so. If Halvard refused, he would be painted as a rabble-rouser, unwilling to engage in the very discourse he claimed to fight for. But if he entered the assembly, he would be stepping onto their battlefield, under their rules. The people looked to him, waiting. Elendra touched his arm. "They mean to lure you in, to silence you." Halvard's jaw tightened. "Then I must not be silenced." He turned back to the people. "I will go," he declared. "Not to kneel, but to be heard." A chorus of voices rose in support, but among them, he heard another sound, Elendra's quiet whisper, one of warning. "Be careful, Halvard. The machine does not invite its enemies to speak unless it believes it has already won." And with that, the doors of the assembly creaked open, yawning like the mouth of a waiting beast. Halvard took a breath and stepped inside. Chapter 10. The Tides of Reckoning. Halvard stepped into the great hall, his footsteps echoing against marble and stone. Lord Dane stood waiting, his expression unreadable. "You will have your chance to speak," Dane said. "At midnight, before the full assembly." A calculated move. They would make him wait, make him stew in uncertainty, make the people outside wonder if he had already been silenced. Halvard only nodded. "Then I will return." But as he turned to leave, Dane spoke again. "I would advise caution, Halvard. The assembly is not as patient as it once was." Halvard met his gaze, steadfast. "Nor am I." And so, as night fell over the towered city of Eldenmere, he found himself once more upon the steps of the assembly hall. The people had not left, and neither would he. The air was thick with the scent of winter fires, the clamor of the crowd swelling into chants. At first, their voices had been cautious, uncertain. Now, they carried the weight of something undeniable, a rising tide of reckoning. "They fear you," Halvard called out, his voice carrying over the restless throng. "Not because you are armed, nor because you threaten their power with force, but because you have begun to see them for what they are." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "They sit in their chambers, bickering over who shall hold the highest chair while the realm fractures beneath their feet. They make decrees not in your name, but in the name of dominion. And when one among them dares to speak against the machine, they do not seek to debate, they seek to silence." The murmur became a roar. Among the gathering stood Elendra, her hood drawn low, her presence unnoticed by most. She had spent years constrained by the machine's iron grasp, but now, thanks to Halvard, she felt emboldened to move against it, a stirring whisper of rebellion within. She watched as the people drew closer to Halvard's words, their doubt giving way to resolve. But she also knew the machine would not sit idle. It would strike, and soon. For too long, the machine had relied on fear, on the quiet compliance of a weary people. But this was defiance in its rawest form. The assembly had given Halvard his invitation, had prepared to let him speak under their terms, within their walls, where they held the power. Yet he had gone back to the people, and worse still, they had not left him. They stood, they listened, they believed. This was no longer an inconvenience, it was a threat. The old ways of control, whispers in the dark, unseen hands pulling unseen strings, would not be enough. The weight of the moment demanded something more decisive, more final. The machine would not ignore it. As if summoned by dark portent, a rider approached through the square, clad in the deep crimson of the assembly's enforcers. He did not dismount but raised his voice for all to hear. "Halvard of Shireward, you are summoned before the assembly at the stroke of midnight. Should you fail to appear, charges of sedition, disruption of order and the incitement of unrest will be brought against you. You will answer before the lords of the realm." Silence fell upon the square. The people turned to Halvard, waiting, watching. Would he go? Would he defy them outright? Halvard met the rider's gaze with steady resolve. "Tell your masters I will come," he said. "But let them know this, I do not stand alone." The rider hesitated but, seeing no fear in Halvard's eyes, wheeled his horse and galloped back whence he came. Elendra stepped forward, lowering her hood. "This is what they wanted," she warned. "To bring you into their den, where their power is greatest." Halvard nodded. "Then let them show their hand." His voice was quiet, yet firm. "Let them show me the face of their tyranny. The night would bring reckoning." Chapter 11. The Chains of Temptation. The great hall of the assembly was dark, save for the flickering glow of braziers that lined the towering pillars. Shadows danced across the marble floor as Halvard stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Before him, seated upon a high dais, was Lord Edric, the grand whip of the machine. But he was not alone. To his right, Lord Dane reclined in his seat, his silvered hair gleaming in the dim light, his hawkish gaze watchful. He had always been the measured voice of the machine, a master of rhetoric, the one who could turn words into weapons sharper than steel. Beside him, others loomed. Lord Aurelian, whose gaunt frame and sunken eyes gave him the look of a vulture poised to descend upon a carcass. Lady Varenne, clad in dark velvet, her jeweled fingers steepled as she observed Halvard with the cool calculation of a spider at the heart of its web. They had gathered not merely to hear him but to break him, to remind him that power, true power, did not belong in the streets among the restless and the hungry. It resided here, in these halls, among those who had held it for generations. Halvard knew the danger in coming here alone, yet he had accepted. He had faced the wrath of the machine before. He would not cower now. Lord Edric laced his fingers together, his gaze heavy with measured scrutiny. "You have caused quite the stir, Halvard. The people speak your name in the streets." A pause. "They call for you." Halvard did not flinch. The people have spoken before, yet the machine has seldom listened to their call. A slow smile curled upon Edric's lips. "Perhaps we are ready to listen now." Silence stretched between them. Halvard felt the weight of the moment, the invisible noose tightening around his fate. This was not merely a meeting, it was a test. "You stand alone as an independent voice in the chamber," Lord Dane observed, his voice smooth and measured, "without a party to shelter you, without allies to protect you. And yet, despite that, you have turned the tide of the realm's voice. That is no small feat." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp like a predator sizing up its prey. "You see, Halvard, the machine does not fear the discontent of the people. It does not fear debate. What it fears is a force it does not control." Halvard held his ground. If the machine fears those who speak truth, then it is already doomed. Edric chuckled, shaking his head. "Idealism is a wonderful thing, my dear Halvard, but I offer you something greater than truth. I offer you power." From his robes, he drew a parchment sealed with the insignia of the assembly. He held it out, his voice smooth, persuasive. "Join us, not as a mere assemblyman, but as one of the machine's guiding hands, a role with influence, with the ear of those who shape the realm, a stepping stone to greater things." Halvard did not reach for the parchment. He knew what this was, a test, a measure of his loyalty and malleability, not true power, but an invitation to prove himself useful, a token position, meant to pull him closer without granting him real authority. It was an offer designed to tempt, to make him believe he was within reach of something greater, if only he played their game. His mind was a storm of thought, of doubt. He had fought against the machine for so long, railed against its corruption and tyranny. And yet, here was the temptation laid bare before him. a seat just close enough to the table to make him hunger for more. Lady Varen's voice slid into the silence like silk over steel. Do you not grow weary, Halvard? Weary of standing alone? Weary of fighting battles that seem endless? What we offer is not submission, but survival. You could accomplish so much more within our halls than you ever could outside them. Halvard exhaled slowly. The weight of the realm seemed to press upon him. The people's faith, the hope he had ignited, was it enough? Could one man truly stand against the tide, or must he ride it to direct its course? He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the assembled lords before settling on Edric. If you truly wished for reform, you would not seek to tame me. You would seek to unshackle the people, but you do not. You seek only to bind me with finer chains. Edric's smile faded. A shadow flickered behind his eyes. Be careful, Halvard. An enemy of the machine does not last long in this world. Halvard took a step back, his resolve hardening. Then it is the machine that should be careful. The people are no longer blind and I am no longer alone. Without another word, he turned and strode from the chamber, leaving Edric and his assembly cohorts in the dim glow of the brazier's light. The machine had played its hand. Now, it was time to break its grip. Outside, the city awaited. The people's voices rose like the tide and Halvard knew, the battle was coming to a boil. Chapter 12. The Fading of Shadows. The great halls of the assembly had never felt so suffocating. The air was thick with unease, hurried footsteps and the weight of impending consequence. The machine, once an unshakable force, now quivered beneath the strain of its own corruption. However, it was not yet completely broken. Its whips still prowled the halls, their whispers snaking into the ears of those still unsure. They tell me I will never sit on the council again, one wavering assemblyman muttered, that I will be cast into the shadows. They promise me coin, another admitted, more than I have ever known. Halvard met their eyes, one by one. And what did the people promise you? Silence stretched between them. The machine will cast you aside the moment you are no longer useful, he continued. But the people will remember. Stand with them and you will be more than a tool in another's hand. You will be a voice that cannot be silenced. Some turned away, fear tightening their spines, but others, more than before, remained. Outside the assembly, the towered city of Eldenmere stirred. The people had watched, waited, and now their numbers swelled in the streets. What had begun as whispers had grown into a roar, and that roar was fast becoming a force. By torchlight, citizens filled the squares. They did not call for kings or lords, nor did they beg for the favor of the powerful. They called for representation, for their voices to be heard, for an end to the machine's rule. For the first time in living memory, the assembly did not dictate the course of the realm. The people did. Halvard watched the glow of torches against the darkened cityscape. As the echoes of the people's voices filled the night, he knew one thing with certainty. The era of shadows was diminishing. Chapter 13. The Price of Conviction. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Eldenmere, carrying with it the echoes of an uneasy people. The city, once subdued beneath the weight of the machine's rule, now pulsed with an energy that had not been seen in generations. By torchlight, figures gathered in huddled clusters, speaking in whispers that carried the tone of revolution. Within the great halls of the assembly, the machine was in turmoil. The chief whip stood before the gathered lords and ministers, his face shadowed in flickering candlelight. His voice, smooth as riverstone, masked the fury beneath. The rabble grows bold, he said, and their boldness emboldens our enemies. His gaze swept the chamber, falling upon the faces of men who had grown accustomed to ruling from the shadows. This is the cost of allowing Halvard to draw breath. Every word he speaks is a hammer upon the foundations of this assembly. If we do not act now, it will crumble beneath us. A murmur of agreement passed through the chamber, though not all voices joined it. Some among them, pragmatists, schemers, saw another path. Lord Dreadbane, a man whose alliances shifted with the wind, leaned forward with a measured smile. Perhaps, he mused, we do not need to silence Halvard. Perhaps we need only own him. The chief whip's eyes narrowed. You propose bribery? Dreadbane spread his hands. Why not? He is but a man, and all men have a price. Not this one, the chief whip muttered, a bitter edge to his voice. We tried before. He's no fool, and he's placed himself beyond the reach of coin. Dreadbane's smirk did not fade. Then we must offer him something greater. Beyond the assembly's walls, Halvard and Elendra walked among the people. He no longer moved unnoticed. Faces turned toward him, some with hope, others with respect. Their whispers reached his ears, words of defiance, of courage, but also of uncertainty. It was Alendra who broke the silence between them. "They're waiting for you," she said. "Not just for words, for action." Halvard exhaled, his breath misting in the cold air. "If we push too soon, we fail. If we wait too long, they lose faith." He turned to her. "What would you have me do?" Alendra's gaze was steady. "The assembly meets on the morrow. The people are ready to march upon its gates. If you do not speak for them, they will find another way to make themselves heard." Halvard knew what she meant. If the machine did not yield to reason, then reason would give way to something far less civil. He had hoped to spare the realm from such a fate, but now, standing amidst a people who had long suffered beneath the weight of tyranny, he saw that the choice was no longer his alone. Then came the messenger. A cloaked figure, moving through the crowd with purpose. He leaned close, speaking only to Halvard. "The assembly sends word. A meeting, tonight." Halvard exchanged a glance with Alendra. A trap? A trick? Or something more dangerous? A temptation? He straightened his shoulders. "Then let us see what the lords of the machine wish to offer." The meeting was held in a dimly lit chamber beneath the assembly. Far from prying eyes, Lord Edric awaited him, a practiced smile upon his lips, and beside him stood a man Halvard knew too well, the chief whip. "We shall not waste your time," Edric began. "You have made an impression, Master Halvard. More than that, you have shaken the very pillars of this realm. That is no small feat." Halvard crossed his arms. "If you called me here to flatter me, I am already weary of it." "Not flattery," Edric said smoothly. "Recognition. You are a man of conviction. That is why we make this offer." The chief whip spoke then, his voice sharp as a blade. "Join us, Halvard." The words hung heavy in the air. "Take a seat beside us at the top table of the assembly," the chief whip urged, his voice smooth but edged with quiet force. "With us, you'll shape the future, make a difference, a place at our side, where your voice will matter, but only if you sit within the circle." Halvard let out a mirthless laugh. "You wish to own me?" "Nothing so crude," Edric replied. "We wish to guide you. You are not the first to challenge the machine, nor will you be the last, but unlike those before you, you have the chance to shape it, to wield true power." Halvard shook his head. "You speak of power, but what of the people?" "They will have what they need," Edric assured him. "Bread, order, stability. That is what they truly desire, is it not? They need not concern themselves with the workings of governance." The chief whip stepped closer. "You could be the voice they revere, a leader, not as an outsider, but as one of us." Halvard raised an eyebrow. "You waste your breath. We have stood at this threshold before, you had my answer. Yet still, you think to sway me with promises of power and influence. You underestimate my resolve." The chief whip's lips curled into a smile, as if the memory was an old, amusing jest. "That was an introduction, a mere taste, a chance to show you the possibilities. This is different, Halvard. A place at the top table, at the very heart of the assembly, where the future is shaped. Not a shadow, not an apprentice. You'll have a say in everything, not just the scraps we throw your way." From the shadows, a robed figure emerged, his movements deliberate, measured. Without a word, he set a small, weighty pouch on the table between them. The unmistakable chime of gold filled the silence. Edric's voice softened, almost conspiratorial, a gesture of goodwill, a token of what awaits should you choose the wiser path. "Influence is one thing, Halvard, but security, true security, comes with wealth." Halvard stared at the pouch, then back at the men before him. He had seen this trick before. They spoke of shaping the world, but what they truly sought was to buy his silence, to temper his fire with comfort. "Then it wasn't power you were offering before. It was a token," Halvard replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not a man to settle for tokens." The chief whip's smile deepened. "And this time, we offer you something far greater than a token, a seat at our table, power that lasts, power that you can use, if you wish, to reshape the world." Halvard's gaze flicked between them, his mind racing. He had expected threats, perhaps even violence, but this was something far more dangerous. This was the machine's true weapon, the promise of inclusion, a seat at their top table. A part of him wavered. If he accepted, he could protect his people from within. No more endless battles, no more struggle. But another part of him, the part that had stood in the assembly and spoken for those without a voice, knew the truth. To accept would be to become them. He turned on his heel. "You have my answer." "You refuse?" the chief whip called after him. Halvard did not turn back. "I am not for sale." The machine had made its last desperate offer. to no avail. It was laid bare for all to see. Chapter 14. The Last Grip of the Machine. The towered city of Eldenmere had fully awakened. What had begun as scattered voices whispering of change had grown into a roar that could not be silenced. The people had gathered in the grand square, filling it from end to end. Torches flickered like stars, their glow reflecting in the eyes of those who had long been ignored. Halvard stood upon the assembly's steps, surveying the sea of faces before him. There were farmers and merchants, scholars and smiths, young and old, all bound by a single truth: they would not be turned away. Beside him, Alendra scanned the growing crowd. "They look to you," she urged, "to lead." Halvard exhaled slowly. "No," he said, "not to lead, to listen." He stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. The murmur of voices hushed, the city itself seeming to hold its breath. "We were told the assembly spoke for us," he began, his voice steady and clear, "but it has spoken only for itself." A chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd. For too long, the machine has ruled, not as servants of the people, but as masters. It has placed its own survival above the needs of the realm. It has divided us, not to represent us, but to control us. That ends now. A cheer surged through the square. "The machine will not yield willingly," he continued. "It will scheme, it will threaten, it will use every weapon it has left, but it holds no power that we do not give it, and we revoke that power now." The roar of the crowd was deafening. Alendra turned to him, her eyes alight with something he had not seen before: anticipation, excitement. "The assembly doors are still barred," she reminded him, but there was no doubt in her voice. Halvard looked out over the gathered throng. Not for long. Inside the assembly, the remaining lords of the machine braced for the inevitable. Their ranks had thinned, some of its most prominent members had fled, some had even turned. Lord Dane stood before the great doors, his hands clasped behind his back. "They will not breach these halls," one of his men assured him. Dane did not answer. Instead, he turned to the vast chamber beyond, where a handful of assembly members still sat, some uncertain, some fearful. "They must believe the old order remains," he said softly. "We must make them believe it." A sudden, thunderous sound shook the air, the pounding of fists upon wood, of voices demanding entry. The people had come to claim their assembly. Chapter 15. The Breaking of Chains. The doors of the assembly trembled beneath the weight of the people. The great iron-bound wood, once a symbol of power's impenetrability, now shuddered as voices rose in unison, demanding entry. Within, the last lords of the machine stood rigid, watching as the inevitable pressed closer. Lord Dane's grip tightened behind his back. "Hold your nerve," he commanded the others. "The people may rage, but rage does not govern. It is order that rules. We will outlast them." But the words rang hollow. A final, mighty strike against the doors sent them bursting open. The roar of the crowd surged into the chamber like a wave crashing against a fortress. The citizens of Eldenmere flooded in, not with torches and blades, but with their presence, their unyielding will. Halvard stepped forward, facing Dane across the widening gulf between past and future. "It is over," he said. Dane's lips curled into something like a smirk. "You believe victory is so easily claimed? Do you think this," he gestured toward the crowd, "is governance? You will find that tearing something down is far simpler than building something better." Halvard met his gaze without flinching. "And you built nothing better. You built a system that fed itself while the people starved." Dane exhaled, his smirk fading. "Then what will you do, Halvard? Seize power for yourself? Declare yourself a ruler of the free?" The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed upon the answer. Halvard turned to the assembly's great podium, the very place where generations of machine-controlled representatives had stood, bound by party whips and whispered threats. Slowly, deliberately, he ascended the steps, not to claim dominion, but to make clear what had already begun. "This chamber does not belong to me," he declared, his voice carrying across the hall, "nor to the machine. It belongs to all of us." A buzz pervaded through the gathered crowd. For too long, power has been hoarded in secret rooms, traded among those who serve themselves. That ends now. We will not replace one tyranny with another. We will build something new. And to do that, we must first ensure that no man, no faction, no machine, may ever claim absolute control again. From the shadows, one of Dane's last loyalists called out, "And how will you do that? By tearing the assembly apart? What happens when the people disagree? You will soon find you need order to rule." Halvard's gaze was steady. Order must serve the people, not the other way around. This assembly will not be shackled to parties, to machines of control. It will belong to those who serve not their own ambition, but the people's will. Dane scoffed. A dreamer's folly. No, Halvard said. A beginning. At that, he stepped down from the podium. He did not sit upon the speaker's throne. He did not take a title. He simply stood among the people, as one of them. And in that moment, the machine was broken. Chapter 16. A City Unbound. The assembly's torches burned late into the night. The old banners of the machine had been torn down, replaced by none at all. No sigil, no emblem, no single name to rule over the many. For the first time in living memory, the hall was filled not with whispers of backroom deals, but with voices raised in earnest debate. Inside the chamber, Elendra stood alongside other newly declared independents, men and women with no political allegiance but to their constituents, each one having broken free from the machine's grip. Their presence in these halls was a living testament to the shifting tide. The first independent assembly was messy, it was loud, and it was free. Halvard sat at the edge of the chamber, watching as those who had once been silenced now spoke without fear. Some called for new laws to protect against corruption. Others demanded accountability for those who had abused their power. There was no longer a single hand guiding the will of the assembly, no whip to bring them to heel. For the first time, decisions would be made not by the weight of one party's rule, but by the many voices of the realm. Elendra stepped beside him, arms crossed as she surveyed the disorder. It's a wonder anything gets done. Halvard smiled faintly. That's how it should be. She exhaled. And you? You should be up there. They'd have you lead them, if you wished it. Halvard shook his head. That is why I won't. She studied him for a long moment before nodding. Lead them, and they will follow, he said. But teach them to lead themselves, and they will never need another ruler again. Elendra smirked. That sounds like something a leader would say. Halvard chuckled. Then I'll be the first to break that habit. Halvard turned his gaze toward the great doors of the assembly, now thrown open. Outside, the city bustled with new energy. The people no longer looked toward the halls of power with dread or resentment, they watched them with expectation. Outside the assembly, people gathered in clusters, still speaking of what had come to pass. A smith with soot-darkened hands argued with a merchant about the future of trade. A group of scholars huddled together, debating how to enshrine the new freedoms in law. Farmers, soldiers, scribes, people of every station had come, and none seemed eager to relinquish the voices they had found. It was working. Yet, as Halvard passed through the streets, he saw something else. In the alleyways, where light did not reach, old ambitions still stirred. A pair of figures spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flicking toward the assembly's glowing windows. A merchant, once aligned with the machine, whispered to a former official. Their words were quiet, but their intent was clear. The people forget, one muttered. Give it time, the other agreed. Halvard did not stop them. He did not call them out. He had always known that power, once unseated, would seek to rise again. That was the nature of men. Instead, he turned toward the hills beyond the city, where the wind carried the scent of the open world beyond Eldenmir's walls. At the crest, he paused, looking back one final time. The assembly still shone bright against the darkness. The people still stood, still spoke, still fought for something better. A single victory did not mean the war was won. Democracy was not a prize to be claimed. It was a struggle, an eternal vigilance. With a long breath, Halvard turned away from the city's glow. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now, the city stood unshackled in its newfound freedom. Yet even as the people rejoiced in this moment of unity, Halvard knew the machine would not sit idle. It would watch, wait, and inevitably answer in the only way it knew, through cold and calculated menace, plotting to crush what had just begun.